Welcome back, everybody. My name is Arrow, and today I'm bringing you my build of the league, Glacial Cascade Golemancer Elementalist. This build combines a lot of things that I believe are very underrated in the current meta of Path of Exile. Let's start with Elementalist, which has a very low play rate this league. I believe it's because people think that you cannot get defensive on a Witch. Now, I am playing my third Witch of the league. One was a Svalin build, which got to max block. I played one Font of Thunder build, which converted all elemental damage to chaos and lightning. And now I am doing a Golemancer. I think golems are very strong right now, and playing a build like this allows for a lot of budget options that would otherwise not be available. I spent only a few divines getting the Flesh and Flame for Forbidden Power, which is +1 power charge from a cultist. Perfect Ashes of the Stars is only 3 divines. +1 power charge Heat Shiver is 4 divines, and a Headhunter, as last I checked, was 11 divines. So all of the most powerful uniques in the build are only a handful of divines apiece, which means you can put together a very cheap version of this build if you want to. Now, I min-maxed this build like crazy and put a lot of money into it. I have Tormented Wands, but I did play this for a day with Void batteries and was very happy with the result. So the second thing I want to talk about that is underrated is the skill, Glacial Cascade. Hatred scaling is just as good as ever for physical to cold builds, and after the nerf to Hatred, a lot of people have dropped it. And what I found was that things like Hatred Watcher's Eyes were significantly cheaper than they were in the past, despite not really being nerfed for a fizz to cold conversion. Glacial Cascade was a favorite skill of many people back in the day. It was often used on mines, and it's still very much viable for mines. But I wanted to play self-cast. I played a self-cast version a few leagues ago, and I thought I could reimagine it with Tormented Spirit Wands this league to get crazy amounts of cast speed and move speed, and I sure was right. Now, I spent a couple hundred divines on my wands, so if you're looking to min-max this build, you can push this build really, really far, but you can also play it on a budget. Now, what is this build good for? I blasted tier 16 8 mods on the budget version, as well as on the endgame version, as well as tier 17s. I was able to take down a few Ubers, but it's not a great bosser. Any skill that requires you to self-cast and stand still is not going to be ideal. But it did take down a few Ubers, so if you wanted to do that, you definitely can, but I don't recommend it as a bosser. I chose to go for a Headhunter in this version because it scales the AoE and the Fizzes extra really, really well, but you could use a Mage Blood if you wanted to spend a little bit more money. So let's jump in and talk about the build and get you playing if you want. Just as a quick aside, I stream every single day on Twitch, twitch.tv/AER0__. You can stop by and drop that Twitch Prime. One important note, if you saw the video from a few weeks ago about my heart situation, I do have some follow-up news. I'll keep it brief. Basically, I am scheduled for open heart surgery next week, and I will be taking some time away. If you're interested in getting updates on my health and my current situation, you can join my Discord. The link is below in the description. So let's get into it. Okay, so here we have level 97, Ask Me About My Wands. And we'll get into those in a bit. This character was quite easy to level. We even leveled as Glacial Cascade, and it was very smooth. There's so many options for leveling these days. You could do Wolves with Envy. You could get extra flat damage on rare weapons. It's just super easy to level characters these days. So please keep in mind the version that I have here is very min-maxed, and getting slightly worse versions of all of these gear pieces is still going to make a very good build.
Of the Shepherd Sandals. Now,
if you are looking to do tier 16 8 mods, you could cut this budget by 95% and still blast them almost as effectively. But if you want to go fast, you're going to need these. Haunted by Tormented Spirits gives you a buff when you enter a zone that provides you 2 things. It's going to give you a random buff that could be useful or could be useless, but it's also going to give you the base Torment buff, which is 35% move speed, 35% increased damage, 35% attack and cast speed. We have 2 of these, so 70% of all. That is probably the strongest thing that was added to the game this league, and I absolutely had to try it on a build, so I figured I would bring back an old classic, Glacial Cascade. So basically what you're looking for on these wands is +2. You can go Spell and Fizz or Spell and Cold. Spell and Cold is a little bit more damage. I just was able to make these a little bit cheaper. And then you want spell damage, cast speed, crit chance, crit multi, double damage. All of those are useful suffixes. I personally bought both of these partially crafted. They both had the prefixes already done, which was +2 and a spell damage roll. There are resources available online. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. I'm not an expert crafter, but if you're looking to make a +2 fizz or +2 cold wand, there are a lot of resources out there already. All in all, I spent around 300 divines, a little bit less on these 2 wands combined. I know that's very expensive. However, You can put void batteries in both these slots, and yes, you will lose damage. Yes, you will lose speed, but it is still a very, very competitive setup. You can also go for a void battery and a +1 power charge shield, a synthesis shield, and you'll have a very good time with that as well. In the helmet, we have a +1 power charge heat shiver. Our average hits are well over 2 million, so we are always freezing and chilling everything in the game. It's a very, very nice defensive layer because this build doesn't have a ton of defenses, but it feels very, very good to play. So let's talk about Ashes of the Stars, and we will also talk about our Golemancer setup. Ashes gives you 30 quality to all skill gems, and getting one of these is very, very cheap. Looks like they're about 3 to 3.5 divines right now for a perfect quality one. The reason you want this, number one, is because Glacial Cascade's quality gives more damage for the final burst. Now you're going to get multiple overlaps, so your DPS is going to be something like 2 initial bursts and 1 final burst, but in reality, the DPS feels a good bit higher than what it says in POB, and I'm not entirely sure why. I may be getting 3 overlaps, 4 overlaps, I'm not entirely sure. But Glacial Cascade scales damage from quality, so we have a 23 quality gem here, and the 30 quality from our Ashes, and that gets us to 132% more damage for the final burst, which means hitting your final burst is important, but we scale so much area of effect that you pretty much can't help but hit your final burst. Ashes of the Stars also supports all of our other skill gems, including our golems. We get 50% increased buff effect on every single golem that we have because that's the quality plus the Ashes. So we have Lightning Golem, we have a Stone Golem of Safeguarding, and we'll talk about this one really quick. The way that this works is it says, golems grant 15% of melee damage taken from your stone golem's life before you. We scale this quality up a ton, and it ends up being 74%. So when you are hit by a melee hit, 3/4 of that damage will go to your golem first, and then it will go to you afterwards. Now, this golem is not immortal, and it will die, but it respawns after a few seconds. And while playing, because you don't get hit very often, this golem is pretty much always up. So melee damage is going to be trivial to deal with. So our Chaos Golem, we're getting something like 25 or 26% physical damage reduction from. Our Lightning Golem gives us, I think, 40 to 50% attack and cast speed. And then we have another Stone Golem. You can actually run 2 different types of the same golem, and you will get the effects of both. So we have the transfigured Stone Golem of Safeguarding, and we have the original one here. This is giving us a ton of life regen, and we also have it linked to Meat Shield, Guardian's Blessing, and Zealotry. So what happens is, when we press our Zealotry, you see our golem starts to lose life. In combat, we have buffs that will make this life last a little bit longer, but you can see we have a very, very long uptime on our Zealotry from this, even just sitting in hideout. Once this golem dies, he will spend a few seconds of AFK, and you can see reviving stone here, and then he comes back, you can press it again. There are some maps where I only have to press it once and it lasts for 30, 45 seconds, depending on what buffs we have, how much time they spend on a consecrated ground, etc. As you can see, when I press consecrated ground, they pretty much takes forever for it to drop off. So our golems are all benefiting from Ashes of the Stars, and then some of our other gems are as well. For the ring slots, we have Ellie Weakness on hit here. I crafted this myself. I basically used a multi-essence until I hit tier 1 mana regen, because we do use mana in this build, and it might be the most difficult problem to solve. And then I had an open suffix. Once I had that open suffix, I reforged Chaos. And I think it took me a couple tries. I hit tier 1. I was going to settle for tier 3 or 2. But once we hit that, we kept it, and our suffixes were done. You definitely are going to need a couple of mana regen rolls in the build, and I'll talk about the other places that we get it. I then did a couple of reforged life until I hit tier 2 life. I was very happy with that. We slammed on 6 ES and crafted mana cost. In our other ring, we're using my signature venters that I put in just about every build I can fit it into. This was 20 divines, but you're never going to be able to get something exactly like this. What I recommend is that you get one that has pretty good life, pretty good res, and then 15 mana reservation efficiency. You can make up the small amount of res somewhere else in the build. If you decide to go for a Mage Blood, you do not need a Venter's Gamble. You could do something else here. You could get some damage and solve your resists on your flasks. In our ring slot, we have Fire Exposure as an implicit. We get Cold Exposure from a Mastery on the tree. You need to get both for Mastermind of Discord, which gives you 25% extra reduction of enemy res when you apply exposure to them. We use Freeze Prolif here. I got 1.5 meters. I recommend getting that as high as possible. Freeze Prolif is very, very powerful. For the rest of the craft of these gloves, we bought a tier 1 Chaos Res Fracture on some Phantom Mitts. We rolled a Res Essence until we hit tier 1 Spell Suppress. And then we use Eldritch Currency to hit life. We got we were pretty lucky. We were able to hit tier 1 life as well as a hybrid life. The boots, these I bought for 70 divines. I recommend buying them. These come with poison and bleed immune. You get 48, 47%. I of course did not divine these, but I do have full poison immunity with a jewel and then a tattoo. And I think I have 90% chance to avoid bleed, which is so high that when combined with our other avoidance, I don't think I've ever taken a bleed on this build. But you do want to get Tailwind Onslaught Elusive here for maximum speed. I cannot stand crafting these, so I craft usually one pair a league and then I end up buying them whenever I need them after that. So we are wearing a Headhunter belt. This is very, very nice for our stats. We are just at all the stats that we need. Stats were a little bit of an annoyance for the build, but using a Headhunter really helps to solve the dex and strength. If you go for a Mage Blood, you may need to get a little bit of stats somewhere else. For the chest, this is the most expensive mistake that I've ever made. I wanted to use a +1 curse chest. You can get additional curse from Subterranean, which is a delve mod. Getting this on necrotic armor usually will just require that you get the Subterranean mod on another base and you move it onto an 86 plus necrotic. I missed 14 fractures in a row until I eventually bought a fractured successful one off of one of my viewers who were starting to craft them out of pity for me. I'm sure you could go check out the VOD, but it was a true nightmare to try to craft this. So once I had the +1 curse, I did Chaos Resistance Essences until I got tier 1 Spell Suppress. And then I did Max Life and Evasion in ES with Eldritch Currency. This was incredibly expensive and not worth the cost. For me, I did get incredibly unlucky. But again, I was min-maxing the build. I wanted to get the most I could out of it. Let's talk about the flasks. We are not using a Mage Blood. If you are, the flasks will be pretty similar. You'll just want to craft them a tad differently. We are using a gold flask down here. You can swap this out for really anything else, but I like getting the gold returns. We have a Bottled Faith. This is really, really good for consecrated ground. It helps our golem stay alive longer, and it's a bunch of crits, so this actually gets us to crit cap. We have Onslaught and Move Speed, Evasion and Move Speed, and then Evasion and Reduced Effective Curses. I have Flash Charge on crit on all of these, and I found that to be really, really nice. These flasks are up pretty much. These flasks are not up all the time in boss fights, but there's really good uptime here, provided you're attacking, provided you're casting. Okay, so the gems, we talked about the golems that we have. We talked about the 4-link here. In the helmet, we have our aura setup with Enlighten. You could get a level 4 here to give you even more mana available, because again, we do use mana. I have a Herald of Ice, Hatred, and Herald of Ash. Herald of Ash and Herald of Ice do all of the extra clearing that you see in those videos. Herald of Ash gives you Fizz as extra fire. It also gives you the Explode. And then Herald of Ice gives us added flat damage and also a nice big AoE of cold damage when we shatter an enemy. Again, Ashes helps both of these. Herald of Ice gets more radius, and Herald of Ash gets more burning damage for the overkill explosions. We have an Immortal Call Convocation automation set up here in the wand. Again, Ashes is helping all of these. We get a bunch of cooldown on Immortal Call. So that means we have a 1.84 second cooldown, and we have 1 second of uptime. That's about 40% uptime on Immortal Call. That's pretty good without endurance charges. Our Convocation goes off just about every 2 seconds. When our automation is up, it doesn't work in hideout. But what that does is it keeps our golems close to us so they die less. It also keeps them as kind of a shield around us. And it also means they're constantly getting the regen effect of Convocation. In our boots, we have some utility. We have a self-cast Assassin's Mark. I pretty much only use this on bosses, so it's not a huge deal to cast it myself. We also use a Sigil of Power. Now, the way Sigil of Power works is you get less damage taken when you are at max stages. So as you see, we use a ton of mana, so it upgrades once per second, and after 3 seconds of casting, you get to max level. What max level gives you is 23% less damage taken from enemies in the area. This is basically a stronger fortify effect, and you can get this prepared before bosses even spawn. It lasts 12 seconds, and there's really no reason not to keep it up. When we have all of our power charges, when we're in combat, this AoE is much, much bigger, so it's very easy to stay inside the circle. We use a Frostblink of Wintry Blast. Now, I had this on a 3-link with faster casting and Spell Echo, but once I got these wands, I realized I really didn't need it. So just the Frostblink itself is enough. You fly around with this, and also this will even clear the map for you half the time. Also, lastly, we have a Herald of Purity here, and we use 3 Purity skills. All right, let's jump to the tree. There's a good bit of stuff going on here. Let's start with the Ascendancy. Golemancer, of course, we need to have Liege of the Primordial and Elemancer. This gives us +2 golems. We get another one from Golem Commander here. So 100% increased effect. And then this one makes them immune to elemental damage. So any fizz taken as that you have. So this works well with fizz taken as alongside of the stone golem of safeguarding. So if you take damage, it will convert whatever amount that you have to cold or fire or lightning, and then it will make the golem take that damage. But because Elemancer makes it so that golems are immune to Ele damage, anything you convert to elemental will not be taken at all by them. It really helps the stone golem of safeguarding stay alive longer. So that's only for melee damage. However, having them immune to Ele damage is really, really good for keeping them alive. Over here, we use Mastermind of Discord because we are Heat Shiver and Trinity. We're getting a ton of cold and a ton of fire. We regen 1% of mana per second. We've always inflicted exposure recently, so that really helps with our mana usage. I didn't want to go Eldritch Battery because with the loss of the blessing support, the divine blessing, I feel like Eldritch Battery is not nearly as worth as it used to be, and having ES as a life pool that we can both leech and generate things like Ghost Dance, it's nice to have a much bigger life pool. Lastly, Heart of Destruction is just phenomenal. 60% AoE, and then when you hit a unique, you get Convergence, which is 30% more damage. One of my favorite nodes in the game. And then we steal Forbidden Power from the Occultist. Forbidden Power gives you power charge generation. It also gives you a max power charge, and then it also gives you area of effect. So speaking of area of effect, let's talk about our medium clusters. We go Vast Power and Towering Threat. Vast Power, Towering Threat. We have few enough power charges to use 2 Vast Powers, and it's worth it. Down here, we use Pressure Points and Basics of Pain just to get some more crit and crit damage. This node is probably not necessary. You could just go for more damage here. What Blessed Rebirth does is it makes your golems entirely immune for 4 seconds once they've been created. So when your stone golem comes up and you hit your zealotry, for the first 4 seconds they take no damage, and it makes it last a little bit longer. And then all of your minions having max life is also useful for just keeping them alive. Dread March gives them some physical damage reduction. Again, they're immune to Ele, so they only take chaos and fizz. This gives them fizz damage reduction and some chaos res, as well as move speed and life. All positives, but not super necessary. After playing with this build for a while, you could probably just drop this for another damage wheel. For the large clusters, in this one we have Inspired Oppression, mana regen if you've frozen and shocked enemies recently. We're always freezing enemies. Shocking enemies is not quite as often. We do have a bit of lightning damage in the build, and also when we drop our Sigil of Power, that gives us added lightning damage. So even just dropping that every once in a while mapping will keep that up, and it really helps with regen. Doriani's Lesson, we get Leech. There are lots of places to get Leech now for builds. You could get it on gloves. I chose to get it here. And then on our other large cluster, we are using a minion large cluster. This gives us Primordial Bond, which makes our minions have more life. It also gives us damage per summon golem, which we have 4. So 40% increased damage, and then 40% effective buffs granted by your golems. You can look at any golem and see what 40% will do. On the lightning golem, it's 4% attack and cast speed. On the chaos golem, it's going to be another 2% physical damage reduction, etc. So this is super, super powerful. And then on the other side, we get minions get 1% of life regen per second. That keeps them alive longer, and there's not another great node to use here. But Primordial Bond is so strong that it's worth having a mediocre node on the other side of it. Our Watcher's Eye has crit chance while affected by hatred. These are much, much cheaper this league, and then there's a lot of stuff that you can get alongside of this. I got some penetration while affected by zealotry, which we have here on the stone golem. I do have a couple of rare jewels that are getting us some mana regen. Here's one that has 3.8 per second, and then some other stuff that's useful: life, flat spell damage, crit multi, and then this one, life, avoid being poisoned. This helps us get to cap. We have 47% on the boots. Then we have 45% here, and we grabbed one tattoo to get to 100%, so we are poison immune. This Corrupted Blood Jewel, I grabbed one that had some avoid bleed, some mana regen, and life. Of course, you're not going to be able to get this exact one, but things like this are useful. We have the Forbidden Flesh and Heat Flame that we talked about. Over here, we're using a Militant Faith with both regen and reduced mana cost. I recommend getting this combo and then just making sure that none of these nodes are bricked. This wheel is actually pretty strong over here because we are using 3 heralds, but I decided those would be probably my last 3 points that I'd take on the build, and so I don't have that node. Militant Faith with Dominus allows us to get Inner Conviction. We don't care about generating frenzy charges because we have so much cast speed already that this is just more damage per power charge. The build currently has 8, so this is 24% more damage. Our last jewel is the Unnatural Instinct. This is one of my favorite slots for an Unnatural Instinct in the game. It gives us a ton of value. Unfortunately, with the movement of the Spell Suppress wheel because of tinctures getting added, this kind of scuffs the suppress wheel a bit. However, it does give us these 2 nodes. So now we just take this 1 point, these 2 are free, and then we don't take Inveterate. You can see all the things that this jewel gives us: 16 spell suppress, attack speed, evasion, evasion per frenzy, max life, LE resistance, cannot be hindered. It gives us a bunch of decks that we actually need. You could tattoo these if you have extra decks, but this is actually end up being useful for us. And then it gives us crit chance as well. We are taking this wheel here pretty much just to get the open nearby chest when you cast a spell mastery, because it feels really nice to use. If you don't care about this, you can drop this entire wheel. It's not very efficient damage. We are using the charge mastery to be shock immune. We're pretty much always at max power charges because we generate them very, very quickly. So this is pretty much shock immune. We take this mana mastery here, which gives us more reservation, but if you're having issues with mana, I recommend looking at jewels with flat mana, but you can also take this Mind Drinker setup here, maybe replace the nimbleness wheel, and then grab a mastery, which gives you either 5 regen per second, or you can go and get 10% chance to recover 10% of mana when you use a skill. We cast 6 to 7 times per second. That means almost 1 per second. That means almost once per second you're going to get 10% of your mana, which is 124. That ends up being pretty good recovery. So that is it for the build. This is an absolute blast to play. It is so much fun to self-cast Glacial Cascade and freeze and shatter and explode the screen. And I think Torment Wands really push this build to the next level. So if you're looking to spend some money and have some fun, this is a great build for you. So I'm gonna wrap it up there. Thank you all for watching. If you wanna support me, you can stop by my Twitch, twitch.tv/AER0__. I'm live almost every single day up until next week. And if you want to support me here on YouTube, you can like, follow, subscribe, click all the buttons, the bells, etc. Thank you all for watching. And as always, take care.